in our 12-part series on Pilates at Stretching Yoga. So today in the second episode, we're going to start off going through some warm-ups and talk about why we would do a warm-up. And then we'll go through some stretches, and then we'll talk about the thing that's fundamental to a lot of Pilates classes, and that is the concept of neutral spine. So stay with us, and here we go. Okay, so we have the delectable Stacy here to help us again, and Stacy's just going to go through a basic warm-up, and I'll talk about why we're doing it as she's going through it. So off we go. So here we go. This is the first one where we kind of make ourselves silly, pushing our head backwards and forwards. Then she's going to be going side to side, and the idea here is we need to get the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis all in one alignment. So we can't really do that unless we actually know where our head is to start with. So by taking the head forwards and backwards, we actually then have a better concept of where center is. The same if we go side to side. How do I know where is center unless I go to the right and go to the left as well? So going to the right and left helps me put it back to center. And then we just do some circles just to reintegrate that. So the same thing for the ribs. Are my ribs out? Are my ribs in? I don't know unless I go through the movements. Are my ribs to the left? Are my ribs to the right? I don't know unless I actually go through this. So it's very important that we get this alignment before we start exercising or before we start doing our movements. And then, of course, we do this movement here to not just integrate, but to try and make ourselves feel a little bit sexy at the same time. And I think she probably does a better job at it than I do. Okay, pelvis. So, do we carry our pelvis forwards? Do we carry the pelvis back? Again, let's go forwards and back, and then we will know. Most of the muscles that we're concerned with in the body tend to run from bottom to top anyway. So also going through these exercises with the head, the ribs, and the pelvis helps to actually align those diaphragms across the body, the thoracic, the respiratory, and the pelvic diaphragms, so that we can balance them. And all of those muscles, they're kind of like the walls of the house. And we want to get the floor and the roof all in one alignment. Knees are important. Any rotation or imbalance or displacement with the knees is going to affect the whole chain upwards. And you can see how Stacy's feet actually go from side to side as she moves the knees. So the position of the knees is going to affect the ankle and the feet. And likewise the other way around, the position of the feet is going to affect the knees and all the way up through the chain. Very important to actually start moving the spine and get that working using the breath. You can use an out breath to round the back and an in breath to straighten. And then you can also try using an in-breath to round the back, as well as an out-breath to straighten. Try to do the movement starting at the pelvis. Nice little hamstring stretch here. This helps to also integrate the ankles and the knees and the hips together. Because when we move, they obviously all have to have a sequencing in the way that the joints fire. So watch what Stacy does to the feet here. As she's moving the hips, knees, and spine, she's integrating that again with the feet. So movement of the toes, movement of the ankles, and how that works out through the chain is also important. And she's using her breath to help with this. And then she makes this kind of look easy, coming up, a little bit of a stretch through the front, working the inner thigh muscles eccentrically, and working through the hip joint to actually come up and down off her knees, and then coming up into the and then she's going to hold that, and then what I want her to do is to keep the feeling of lifting the head up into my hand, and then as she goes down, she's going to really lengthen through the whole back and spine as though it's being stretched out like a giant piece of elastic, so that her head stays up on the top and she stays nice and tall. And there we have our warm-up, and we can start our exercises. Okay, so we've got Stacey here again to help us, and she's going to demonstrate some hip flexor stretches. So the hip flexors, very, very important to stretch out and to work in order to take stress off the lower back. This is something you can do for all your clients who have any form of low back pain, because those hip flexors are always going to be involved in some shape or form in back pain. So off we go. So if she's got her left leg forwards here, this is the very commonly seen when people do this. Can you see that Stacey's actually collapsed in the lower back there? So what we're going to do is ask Stacey to actually come to it there. Nice. So now if I push on her back here, she's nice and supported. She's not collapsing through. So she's actually working the upper part of the lumbar spine up into the T12-L1 junction here to help stabilize that whole mid and lower back. So how can we help that even further? Well, we can do some breathing. So she can put her hands behind her head. And then I want her to focus on using her breath to get as tall as she possibly can. We're not thinking forwards right now, okay? That comes later. We're focusing on this area here, and I want her to get really nice and stabilized here. So then we can start to add some movements, and if she rotates to the left, she's going to increase the stretch down through the muscles on the right side. If you know your anatomy, she's now starting to stretch the TFL muscle, tensor fasciae lata, and then also those other hip flexors. Now she goes into a side bend. We want to make sure that that side bend is a side bend and she's not shifting across from side to side. And that's also going to help stretch these muscles out here. And now we can go into the movement that most people recognize. So Stacey takes a step forwards, and then that enables her now to get the movement forwards to stretch through the lower part of the hip flexors. And she's doing a good job keeping her spine nice and stable here. And into rotation, and let's ask Stacey just to stop there. So there's a lot of lower back movement here while it's rounded, and I don't really like that so much because the lower back is not for rotation. So let's ask Stacey to come up a little bit, put her right hand on that left knee. Then she can go, and now she's in that stable position. She can use her right hand for support. And now when she starts to rotate, we can see the rotation happening in the thoracic and maybe in the hip joints as well. And then she can carry on this way. So it's not about how far we can go. It's about what can we do with quality movement. So now we're just pushing forwards and increasing. This is okay to have a rounded back because there's no twisting going on. So she's increasing the stretch through the bottom and through the butt. And then comes the difficult one where we have to come up into this nice stable position here. And okay, let's just ask Stacey to pause there. Now so she's just really nicely emphasized how not to do it because she collapsed in the lower back there. So we're going to ask her to take an angle here of the spine so it's in the same line as the leg. Now it's much better for the butt and the hamstring muscles to work here. I'm going to give her a little bit of tension here to work with. And now she has to slowly bend this knee and then push back against my hand. So I want to see those hamstrings firing to lift the leg back as she bends and straightens that leg. And she needs to have the stability from the ball of the foot here and through the whole chain from the front leg foot from the front leg there. So this exercise done correctly is work. It's not a lazy stretch where you hang in your ligaments. Okay, so that's one side done. Now we have to do the other side. So we start with a big, tall stretch. And if you're with your personal training client, you can put your hands across where T12 meets L1 and say, right, is that stable there? Yeah, it's pretty stable. That's good. That's what I want. And she's using her breath to do that. Then into rotation. So if the right leg is in front, I will rotate to the right leg. If the left leg is in front, I will rotate to the left leg. Because we want to stretch the muscles in the leg behind. Then we go into side bending. And again, I want to see a nice, you can't see so well from that angle, but I want to see a nice curvature of the spine here with no shifting across of the ribs. Then that step forwards to allow the movement through through this hip joint here. Want to make sure the sit bones are about the same height. And if you know your anatomy, your ASISs don't go out of sync here. We don't get any funny twisting through the pelvis. And she's gone straight into a much better rotation pattern here. And after the deep stretch here, she can come up into that lunge position. And of course, if you want to put the back foot flat, so it's more like a yoga warrior, that's fine also. But the important thing here is, I want to see that spine stable. I want to see the alignment with the back leg. And I want to feel or see that these hamstrings and these glute muscles are working. Nice, good job. And that's the hip flexors. Okay, so we did the hip flexors, the stuff at the front. Now we come to the stuff at the back. So before we go any further, a little heed of caution. I'm not a big fan of stretching hamstrings. The reason for that is that for the majority of people out there, the hamstrings are actually weak and too long, and they need to be strengthened. Now, having said that, there is the lateral hamstring, which tends to be short on a lot of people, and it can get the knee out of balance. So the hamstrings work like the reins on a horse on your knee, and if one gets out of balance, then it can create a twist which can go up through the back. So this is an exercise not so much to strengthen to stretch the hamstrings, but it's more of an exercise to, one, it can strengthen the front of the legs, the quads, but it's more about sequencing the muscle firing patterns of the hip, knee, and foot, so that the brain is not always talking to the hamstring saying, oh, quick, contract, 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 because it's more about the neural tension of the hamstrings hanging on and being weak, rather than the hamstrings are short and need to be stretched. So we kind of need to understand that. So I've got Lindsay here to help me, and I've also got my trusty blue belt. So let's have a look. The first thing is, most people will go straight into a hamstring stretch, and they will actually forget the fact that the bottom of the foot is part of the chain that goes up through the hamstring. So a hamstring might appear very tight, but the problem is actually the tissue underneath the foot and also underneath the calf. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by stretching the calf and ankle first and mobilizing that, and then we'll go into the hamstring. So in actual fact, I need Lindsay to sit up for this first one. So we're going to wrap the belt around here twice. Can you move back a little bit? And okay, so if I put the belt too low on the foot, there's no leverage. So we're going to have the belt a little bit higher up. And then, so this is in effect actually what the hamstrings do on the knee. So if I ask Lindsay to pull on the right belt here, it rotates the foot that way. If I ask her to pull on the left one, it rotates the foot that way. And that's good, that's what we want to do. So she can bend this leg so that she's more comfortable. And then that's what she's going to do. She's going to pull on one hand and then pull on the other. And then she's going to mobilize the ankle joint like this. And then, of course, what would happen if she pulled on both at the same time? The foot's going to go back, and then she can point and work against that and pull back. So you can see that she's moving the whole time. We're basically mobilizing the foot here. And it's not about pulling and holding and trying to stretch. So the ankle joint gets mobilized, the tissue under the foot gets mobilized, and the muscles up through the calf also get mobilized and stretched, if you like, or released because of what's happening in the foot and ankle. So after she's done that, we'll ask her to lie down, and then we'll straighten out this leg, and then we'll bend the left one, and then we need to get that leverage. So let's ask Lindsay just to straighten the leg up and bend the leg. And she can use her hands at the end of the movement, not all the way through it really. It's just there for some support. So the first thing is we want this foot to move. So when she comes down, she points. Before she goes up, she reaches through the heel. Then she points to come down, and we need to make sure that this doesn't slip. Okay, so now let's watch what happens to the knee and the hip joint while she's doing this. Off we go. So keep going. So did you see her knee started here and then it travels forwards when she straightens? So we don't want that. That's telling me that there's a little bit of an imbalance in those muscles. So what would happen the other way around if she was to straighten and then bring it back? So now it's gone the other way. As the leg straightens, she's now pulling on her hip, so she's overusing her hip muscles. So we want something in between where if she holds her leg there, I'm going to ask her, Lindsay, imagine that your knee has a pin going all the way through it, and when you straighten the leg, it doesn't move because you can't come off that pin. Nice. And she's bending the foot, pointing the foot and coming down. Excellent. So this is about sequencing. So if Lindsay, when she did this, if she could only come to here, that's much better than actually going further with an incorrect firing pattern. Okay? So again, we're after quality of movement, not so much quantity. So let's do a couple more here. Usually we would do maybe 5 to 8 repetitions on each leg. Nice. So if I come and I have a look from this direction here, I can see that Lindsay's taking the leg straight up the center. So now, if I ask her to actually bend the leg, and now take the knee towards the camera there, so it's going to cross her midline, and now straighten out the leg, the foot is now kind of in line with her right shoulder, so it's gone across. Now that's going to stretch the muscles on the outside of the left leg, so her lateral hamstrings, the ones that tend to get short, are now being stretched. So she's going across the midline. So she's going out across here. And again, we do that 5 to 8 times. And then when she finishes, she can bring this strap across to this hand. And then bring that across. And if she wanted to, she can hold a static stretch. or she can just continue moving that across just to give it a little bit more of a stretch up into the hip joint. Okay, so now let's see that all in real time on the right foot. So she needs to start with the ankle, so she has to sit up. And we'll wrap that round for her. Okay, so you might see this easier now. So she has to sit up for the right foot. And we'll put that out, bend the left leg. And we're going to start with pulling and mobilizing the ankle. And she can either have the foot relaxed so that her hands are doing all the work, or she can actively go with it or against it. She's just going to play really with what feels good for the ankle and the foot. Then we can go into dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. And if she keeps tension on the rope the whole time, then we'll manage to keep it in the same place. If she suddenly lets go, then the rope's going to fall off the foot. Okay, into the hamstring stretches. So she needs to roll down. And we're going to bend the leg up. And let's do 5 stretches here, going straight up the center. 1. So she's going to breathe out on the stretch. 2. 3. And we only hold for 1 second. That's important. If you know what the stretch reflex is, then we want to inhibit the muscle spindles from getting the muscles to fire. So we have 1 second to do that. Good. Then she's going to bring the leg across towards me. And then she's going to get that stretch on those lateral hamstrings. Good. And then come across, hold the stretch. So now the stretch goes up into the hip joint. And bend the knee and come on up. Good, nice. Okay, so that's how we can stretch the hamstring using the strap. Now, if you're with a one-on-one client, then there's something called a PNF, which is something that I use nearly all the time. So PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I'm sure a lot of you, or not, if not all of you, might have heard of this, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. Some people call this contract, relax, and there are different variations of it. Contract, relax, agonist, contract. Contract, antagonist, relax, contract, etc., etc. But we're just going to take you through the most basic one, and it's very effective for working one-on-one with clients. So I've got Lindsay here again, just to help me. So we're going to work on her right hamstring. Where is the first point I feel her tension? I'm not interested in how far I can go. I'm interested in how far. Oh, actually it's there. That's where I feel some tension. So yeah, of course, I can get it all the way to there, but I've already gone past what we call the first barrier. So I'm going to go up to here. And now I'm going to say to Lindsay, I'm going to say, do not let me move you. So I'm going to be lifting her leg, and she's going to stop me from lifting her leg. And I'm only applying a very slight pressure here. And I'm going to count. 1, 2, slowly, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to ask Lindsay to breathe in. And then breathe out and relax the leg. And I go, oh, there's the new barrier. That's where I feel it begin to tighten again. So I have 2 choices. I can hold it there, or I can just come back out of that just to allow her body to say, right, that's safe, that's okay. And then I'm going to say to Lindsay again, don't let me move you. So I'm going to try and lift that leg. And we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe in. And breathe out, relax. And then we have the new barrier. And I'm going to say again, Lindsay, don't let me move you. And we hold for 5 seconds. So this will be the 3rd repetition now. Normally, you're not going to do more than 5. Breathe in. And breathe out. Relax. Whoa. And there's the new barrier. I'll stop at 3. Come back all the way out of it. Give her a chance to relax. And then repeat. And we'll look for that new barrier. Boom. So the new barrier from the beginning is slightly higher up. I'm going to say, don't let me move you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in. And breathe out. And we're going straight up to about here. And, you know, if it's a heavy leg and I'm a small person, I can use my shoulder. Don't let me move you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in. And breathe out. And I'm using her relaxation to go into the stretch. I am not trying to push her through the stretch. The moment she starts to feel uncomfortable, I need to back off. Okay. So that's a contract, relax, or PNF stretch for the hamstrings. Very, very useful for working with people with tight hamstrings because it's more about getting the brain to release the tension and resetting the muscle spindles as opposed to just purely stretching the tissue. And if you remember, a lot of people have long, weak hamstrings and we need to stay away from overstretching them. Okay, so we've done the front of the legs, we've done the back of the legs. Very important part that a lot of people neglect is the inner thigh, the inside of the legs. And again, for people with back pain, this is an extremely important part to open up because if these muscles on the inside of the leg get short and tight, they will actually pull the pelvis forwards into that anterior tilt and contribute to the spine being pulled and put more stress into the back. So if we can get these to let go, much nicer for the lower back. So rather than a simple stretch, how about we mobilize them so that they get used to working when we walk, when we run, when we jump? Because if we just stretch something, how do we know it's actually now going to work or stretch when we move? We need to be a little bit more specific. So off we go. Stacey's going to show you. Now, before we start, let's have a look at the position of the foot here. So there's Stacey's left knee, and if I draw a line across, okay, if she's not, or if you are not so flexible, you can take the leg in front. You can take it to the center, and you can take it behind. Probably only go behind if you're really very flexible, because that knee has to come and then we've got to really open up into external rotation on that hip joint, and that's pretty difficult to do. So, general rule of thumb, take your knee, draw a line across, and then have the opposite heel in line or even slightly in front. Okay, so then she can start doing her stretch or her mobilization. And it's a nice, fluid, continuous movement. So she's going forward, she's going backwards on the pelvis, and there's a nice rotation through the hip joint here. And she's getting all of those adductor muscles because the leg's bending and then it's straightening. So we have the short adductor muscles, and we have the longer ones, so we can only stretch the longer ones or mobilize those if we have a straight leg. And as she goes through, what I can do is, if I was a one-on-one with a client, I can just use one finger just to help lift that knee up and go into some external rotation there, just to increase that stretch. Okay, so let's have a look what that looks like from the side on the other leg. And the important part here I want you guys to see is what happens to the lower back. So, of course, we're going to be rounding it a little bit, okay? But in my mind, I want to be thinking, what is the least amount of rounding in that lower back? So if Stacey just holds that there, I can just feel that her spine's starting to lift here. So let's get her to lift her chest a little bit more, take the pelvis over, open up through the hip here, and then we can get movement in the hip joint as opposed to the lower back. And if you wanted to bring it into the spine as well and combine that movement, you can do that, and then going forwards and round and flatten as you go forwards, and round back cat, going forwards, lift in, and then that movement of the spine, pelvis, and through the thigh is a very, very nice mobilization technique for the hips. Okay, very nice. Thank you, Stacey. So we've been through a warm-up, we've gone through some of the important stretches that we can do. We've done some stuff for group class, we've done a little bit for the hamstrings for a one-on-one session. So we're just going to change things a little bit before we actually go into all of the other exercises, because we now have to come to the boring bit. Okay, so this is the bit where we have to talk about neutral spine, what that means, and how we can use that information to work with our clients, whether it's in a personal training session or a group class or a yoga class or in sport, in Pilates, doesn't really matter. Okay, so what is neutral spine? Right, everybody has 5 bones in the lower back. That's the lumbar spine. Then we have 12 bones where our ribs attach. That is the thoracic spine. And we have 7 bones in the neck. That's our cervical or cervical spine. Now, each part of the spine, so those 3 areas, has a curve. So if this is the front of the body here, so I'm facing this way, the neck has a curve that goes that way. And we want that. That's called a lordosis, or a secondary curve. The thoracic spine has a curve that goes this way. That's called a primary curve, or a kyphosis. The lumbar spine has a curve that goes this way. Again, that's the same as the cervical spine. That's a lordotic curve, or it is a secondary curve. Some people will refer to lordoses either as the curve, or they will refer to it as an excessive, too much curvature of the lumbar spine. Okay, so we need to have these curves because these curves distribute the weight of gravity through the spine. So that's one thing. If the spine was completely straight, everything would go down into the bottom. And if it was straight, these bottom lumbar vertebrae would actually have to be, I think it's like 5 to 10 times the size that they are to actually take that weight. So that wouldn't be a very good design. Coming out of the side of the spine, we have these yellow things. So these are the nerves which pretty much go to every part of the body. And we need to keep those nerves as free as possible, because if they start to get trapped or impinged, we can get trouble with the organs, we can get trouble with the muscles, we can have pain, dysfunction, a whole bunch of things. So another way to describe neutral spine would be to say the position for each vertebra that maximizes the space for the nerves to come out the side. Now, each vertebra is stacked on top of the one below, and the space for those nerves is created by how those vertebrae are stacked on top of each other. So we need to find the optimal arrangement, and that's different for every person. Some people tend to be more flatter, some people are actually more arched. We could also define neutral spine as the position at which the spine is the longest. So, as an example, if we get Lindsay to bend her legs here, if she was to go into a curvature this way, in actual fact, her height has actually shortened. Now, if I ask her to slowly straighten out, you can see her head pushes into my hand and she's getting long. Now, if she went into an excessive straightening of the spine, she would actually start to shrink again. And as we go forwards and roll through the spine, then she gets longer. So, if I'm standing up and I roll my pelvis forwards, you can see I get short. And now, as I bring it back, I start to get tall, and then as I continue rolling back, I get shorter again. So your neutral spine is going to be the point at which your spine is the tallest or the highest. And that's going to maximize the ability to actually move through the spine. So we know that we need to get this so-called neutral spine to maximize the space, create maximum height. There's also another important thing through the neck here, and that is that the bones of the neck actually have holes through the side through which the arteries supplying the brain go to. So if those bones are out of alignment, then the blood going up to the brain is actually going to be cut off somewhat. So if we ask Lindsay to put her legs out, it's easier to see. At the bottom we have the pelvis. So the first thing is, people talk about neutral spine. Well, that's actually something of a misnomer. We should be talking about neutral pelvis and spine together, because we just saw that if I move the pelvis forwards, it creates an arch in the spine. If I move the pelvis back, it creates a straightening of the spine. We can see this quite simply if Lindsay bends her legs and I ask her to roll the pelvis forwards as though she was tipping a glass of water between her legs. She creates a lot of arching under the spine that goes up into her head, and if she did it properly, the neck would go backwards. And if she was to round the spine by pulling it back, pulling the pelvis back, if she had a glass of water, it's now tipping onto her belly, and that now flattens her spine, and I can't get my hand underneath. So, how do I know where is the optimum position? At the bottom of the spine, we have the sacrum, and the sacrum is this triangular bone here. And that's part of the whole pelvis itself with the two pelvic halves. So some people define a neutral pelvis as the position where the ASISs, these bony bits at the front here, and the pubic bone, if they were against a wall, they would be flat. Well, we have soft tissue in front of these areas, so it's actually pretty difficult to get up against a wall and say, right, okay, that's neutral. So we can kind of use our hands to help manage that, and I'll show you in a second. The other thing is what people tend to do is they will roll back onto the pelvis naturally when they lie down. The reason for that is a lot of these muscles that comes from the spine down through the front and also at the front of the hip tend to be short on a lot of people, and so they can create tension. And if we now, when we lie down, if we bend our legs and release those muscles by just letting go, then we're going to have a tendency for the pelvis to roll back and, oh yeah, that feels comfortable, but it's not a good position to work in. We need to be able to use our muscles to stabilize the pelvis and spine in a good position. All right, so let's ask Lindsay to bend her legs. And let's see here now. If I ask her just to take her finger and put that into that place where the leg comes into the pelvis here, then that muscle that comes across there, if it starts to push out, then we know that she's probably too much in a posterior tilt. Now, if she rolls the pelvis forwards, I don't know if you can see, but you can see that crease actually gets bigger. So we want that. We want that crease because we want the ability for this bone to move inside this joint. So I can say to Lindsay, can you roll your pelvis back? So it's going this way. Can you roll it all the way forwards? And when she does that, hopefully she can start to feel the difference between rolling on the back of, the ilium, the hip bone, and rolling on her sacrum, this triangular bone. And we want her to be on the sacrum, as though it just goes plop and straight down. So a lot of people, when they come into this position properly the first time, they will feel like their back is arched. And it will be arched because they're not used to being in a neutral spine position. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Lindsay to finish where she thinks is halfway between forwards and back. Great. Now, let's ask her to make this position with her hands. And so now what she's doing is she's putting the fingertips onto the pubic bone and then just making a triangle with the thumb here. And so this is actually now going to tell us, is the pelvis forwards or is the pelvis back? So using her hand, which gives very good feedback to her brain, she can determine what position her pelvis is. That's much better than just thinking, oh, I'm going to roll backwards and forwards with the pelvis. The hands are much better talking to the brain. So now she's in that good position. She has a neutral pelvis. We always start with a neutral pelvis. Always neutral pelvis first, then we go to the spine. So, the pelvis has gone to a neutral position. Oh, but my spine is arched. So we need to get the spine out of the excessive arch and into a better stabilized position. And most people do it by, guess what? Going into that posterior position. So we don't want that. That's why we start with the pelvis. So we've got the pelvis neutral now, but the spine has too much curvature. So how do we go about producing a better position? Well, we use the breath and we use our ribs. So I'm going to ask Lindsay just to take a breath in and then go, ah. And as she relaxes through her breath, her ribs relax down to the floor, and that relaxation of the ribs brings the spine into a much better position. And then I can say to Lindsay, right, can you keep the spine in that position when you're breathing in and out? And she's doing a very good job. Okay, so now we got the spine and the pelvis into this neutral position. How are we going to keep it there? Well, first of all, we're doing it on the floor because the floor gives feedback to her sacrum, her pelvis, and her spine. In mid-air, it's very hard to get this proprioceptive feedback. That's why we spend time to do it on the floor first. So, I want Lindsay to use her breathing muscles to maintain this position. And guess what? This is her core. When people talk about core, it's breathing. Your breathing muscles are your core muscles. So, as she breathes out, the ribs relax down, diaphragm goes up, pelvic floor goes up. When she breathes in, ribs go up, diaphragm goes down, pelvic floor goes down. She can use some abdominal muscles to help this movement. So when she breathes out, she can think about maybe narrowing through the side, and when she breathes in, she can think about maybe breathing into the back of the ribs. So, can I put my hand underneath her lower back? Yes, I can. For most people, you should be able to do this. Get at least one finger underneath. Now, I'm going to push my finger up at her spine. Does the spine move? No, it doesn't. It's pretty good. Let's have a look at what happens here if she lets go of that. So I'm going to push up, up, oh, up, oh. Now she's using her back muscles. Let's go back. That's not good. So now let's go back to her using her breathing muscles. And now you can't see any movement. So that's very good. Okay, so what she didn't do is she did not overuse the muscles at the front of her body and press her spine into my hand. That's a very important concept. We don't press the spine down into the hand, we just use the abdominal muscles to help maintain that stability with the breath. Okay, so we have space under the lower back. What about the rib cage? No space. That's good. That's what I want. I don't want space under the rib cage. Now, let's take it a step further. When she breathes in, do I feel anything here? Nice. When she breathes in, so I'm just poking my fingers up. When she breathes in, it's like a balloon filling up and pressing into my hand. So I can ask her, when you breathe in, can you feel your ribs expanding and going into the floor? And she would say yes. What about if she can't? We would probably see something like this. Whoa, the ribs went out. So you'll see this in so many people when they breathe in. The ribs push out and now the lower back tightens. 15,000 times a day. That makes a lot of difference. So 15,000 times a day I do this, 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 this. That's a lot of dysfunction to put on your body over not just a day, but a couple of weeks, months, years. So, just to get people to lie in, I know it looks quite boring and we've been talking about this, but it's really important that you actually understand this. All the exercises that we do are built on the understanding that you can actually maintain a neutral spine position whilst breathing properly, using your breathing muscles to maintain this core stability. Everything else is just added on top. So let's just have a look. Let's take it one step further before we finish. And that's, okay, if Lindsay was to lift this leg, what would happen to the lower back? Well, this is a lot of weight. This is a lever that's coming up, and it's going to pull the lower back up. So now we're adding stress into the lower back to go along with the stability that we've created. So, or test the stability. So, let's ask Lindsay to lift the other leg. And what I'm looking for is when she lifts, does that pelvis move either way, or does she rock backwards and forwards, or is there a twist? We don't want to see anything moving. So if there was a butterfly on her belly having a nap, don't disturb the butterfly. If there was a full glass of water on her belly, don't spill any water. And then we can ask Lindsay just to touch the floor. Imagine that she's touching water with the tip of her toe. Oh, too hot, bring it back up. Let's try the other leg. Touch the water. Oh, too cold, bring it back up. How about both legs? And just about right. Good, so very, very nice. Then let's slowly put the legs down. So we just seen that she can actually move through her hip joint whilst maintaining a neutral pelvis, neutral spine position, and do a nice natural breathing pattern. Then we can take it a step further and go into some basic exercises, which is what we'll do in the next class. So thank you for bearing with me, going through that and listening to the talking, all the boring bits there. But it's absolutely essential that there is at least some basic understanding of how to maintain or move the pelvis, hips, spine, breathing pattern. It's essential to everything else that we build on. If you don't get this, everything you do is not necessarily a waste of time, but everything you do is really not going to be of that much benefit. So thank you for bearing with me, and we'll take this forwards into the next class where we'll go through some basic exercises. So thank you.